Welcome back, everybody. Time now 9:18 on the East Coast and 6:18 on the West Coast. Do want to pop up this live image over the White House in D.C. as we get to the latest on news that we are following right now politically. President Biden's staff could be wrestling with the idea of whether to issue blanket pardons for President-elect Donald Trump's potential enemies to protect them from any type of retaliation. That's according to a new report from the New York Times citing sources that are familiar with the discussion. The idea behind it, the paper reports, is to give clemency to some current and former government officials for any possible crimes over a period of years. White House officials say they do not believe any of them actually committed crimes, but it would be overall to prevent them from politically motivated prosecution. The discussion over blanket pardons was reported earlier by Politico as well. Talks have reportedly been at staff level, though Biden has spoken reportedly with some senior members of his team. Names that have been mentioned, according to the New York Times, include former Representative Liz Cheney, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who served as the top infectious disease expert for the government, Jack Smith, the outgoing special counsel, and Senator-elect Adam Schiff. A lot of other names here on that list as well. All of this discussion comes days after the president issued that pardon for his son, just weeks before Hunter Biden was to be sentenced on gun and tax convictions. A lot to discuss here, so I do want to bring in Kim Wehle, a law professor at the University of Baltimore and the author of Pardon Power: How the Pardon System Works and Why. Good morning, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us and help break down a very involved subject here.
Good morning. Great to be with you.
All right, so Kim, first off, I do want to ask you overall, what is a blanket pardon? How would that work, and have we seen anything like that before?
I think this is a new terminology that's arisen in the last few days, but a pardon is forgiveness for a federal crime. And the idea of pardoning someone when there has not yet been an indictment, which I think is what we're talking about here, started really with Gerald Ford, President Ford pardoning Richard Nixon for any crimes relating to Watergate, not anything in particular that he had never been indicted. There was an indictment waiting in the wings for Richard Nixon. It was never actually filed. So that would, I think, be the closest historical analog to the kind of blanket pardon that is being floated reportedly from the Biden administration.
And is it a real possibility? Is this something that could happen?
Hard to say. I mean, I have been one of the people that have said it would make sense, frankly, for Joe Biden to consider this because we're in a new era, I think, of what the Justice Department is going to look like and what the designs are for the Justice Department. President Trump, even in his last administration, indicated frustration that he was not able to use the Justice Department as sort of an arm of his own intention. And he's replacing his own FBI director. He appointed Chris Wray with Kesh Patel, who has an enemies list. And meanwhile, we also have the United States Supreme Court immunizing President Trump from any accountability for committing crimes using the Justice Department. So it makes sense that, a novel response would happen with respect to novel conditions moving forward under the second Trump administration.
As you've written a book about pardons, I want to get your take. Over the weekend, when word did come out that President Biden had issued that pardon for Hunter Biden, tell me about your initial thoughts overall on that and really what you thought about it.
That I actually expected that to happen, and I think it's tied to the same theory. That is, Biden's recognizing that Hunter Biden could have a bullseye on his back in the next Trump administration because of the promises Donald Trump has made and the new sort of leeway to use the Justice Department to sort of go after people, not look to see if a crime was committed, but find a crime. That's the idea. So, Hunter Biden's prosecution, and there was one guilty plea, one conviction were for relatively low-level offenses, and they were occurred at the time he was heavily under a relapse in his addiction after the death of his brother Beau. So I think if Hunter Biden weren't attached to the Biden family, his profile wouldn't be out of the mark for a pardon, which is designed to bestow mercy. But frankly, there really isn't any fairness to the pardon system. It's completely subjective. It's always been subjective since George Washington issued the first pardon for people who participated in the Whiskey Rebellion.
When we look into the future here, and a lot of this is probably unclear at this point, but I do want to get your take as you are the expert. Can a future president undo a pardon of a previous president? For instance, if Trump were to come into office and say, I don't want Hunter Biden to be pardoned, can that happen, or is that unclear?
I think the answer to that is no, because Article 2 of the Constitution just gives the affirmative power to pardon, that the president shall have the power to issue reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States. Can't pardon state law offenses, only U.S. offenses. But I think what could happen is Donald Trump could indict Hunter Biden anyway, and then Hunter Biden would raise the pardon in defense of that indictment, and then the question of whether that pardon was constitutional would go to the Supreme Court. So that's the way he could still potentially have some liability. This Supreme Court majority is very Donald Trump friendly, but in that opinion over the summer on immunity, the court made really clear that pardons are pretty much untouchable, that you can't second guess a pardon. So I think Donald Trump would be very hard pressed to win that argument, even with the Supreme Court. My guess is Joe Biden's pardon of his son would stand.
And I want to pop up the book cover right here. We talked about this off the top a little bit, but you did write this book. It's called Pardon Power: How the Pardon System Works and Why. Can you tell me a little bit about the book itself? Because it sounds as though you delve a little bit deeper into what a pardon is and all of that. A lot of questions that folks do have out there, and we've been discussing a lot over the past several days, weeks, and months.
Yeah, so the pardon power is kind of this sleepy area of constitutional law that doesn't get a lot of discussion and coverage, even under the Trump administration, very controversial pardons. So I decided to write this book because it hasn't been discussed. And it goes all the way back to the Code of Hammurabi. Of course, famously, Jesus of Nazareth was denied a pardon in the New Testament. It was given to a murderer by the name of Barabbas. The Roman people could pardon one person on the Sabbath, denied Jesus a pardon, and that gave birth to the entire Christian religion. So the pardon power is kind of in the center of these ideas of justice and fairness and corruption, religion and law. So the book starts with stories around some really unknown pardons involving the Brigham Young and the Mormon religion, and then goes through common law England, and then it talks about the history of the framing of the Constitution, why it's in there, and more modern pardons, and asks questions. Should we have it? If we have it, what should be done about it? Is it really being implemented in a way that's fair? So it's a one-stop shopping for all of this discussion, and it will get folks into the Constitution itself and how to think about the Constitution.
All right, Kim, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. Anything else you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
Well, I think we should also think about whether you were setting aside the Biden situation. Will Donald Trump pardon the people who participated in the January 6th insurrection? You know, those pardons could mobilize more violence. I make the argument in the book, even though there's unlimited power to pardon, I think presidents have an obligation to make sure the public is safe, notwithstanding a pardon. And there's some pretty troubling pardons at the state level as well. Folks pardoned that went on to commit crimes. And I think that is probably something that is not what anyone wants.
All right, Kim, thank you again for taking the time to join us and break down a topic that I'm sure we'll be covering a lot over the coming days and weeks. Thank you again.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.